Another humbling night for Baylor basketball. When are we going to stop saying that? Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show, Rogue Media Sports Network, and newsbreaker for Baylor football on YouTube, or on Twitter, I guess, but also up here on YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bears' humiliating loss to Arizona last night and the big win that the women scored over Utah, and also how Dave Aranda has finalized that staff. We talked about Carson Hall. Now Carson Hall is officially coming to Waco. Let's break it down for you. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Really tough night in Tucson last night for the Baylor Bears. Pete Souza, we had on the show the other day, he said kind of a scheduled loss. If I'm going to give you 2 out of the 3, Cincinnati, Arizona State, Arizona, you probably think we're going to lose to Arizona. And I didn't disagree with him on it. I absolutely get where he's coming from. But I kind of had this sentiment after the Iowa State game. And that is, when do you stop having the scheduled losses? Because the really good teams don't have that. They don't have scheduled losses. Arizona beat Duke at Cameron last year. Duke comes out to Tucson this year in the non-conference, and it wasn't a scheduled loss. They worked them. They beat them by double digits. So, that's a good team. Baylor's not at that. They're not at that. They are a team that the last 2 years has fallen into the scheduled losses. They're bullies. They beat up on the bad teams, and they don't beat the good teams unless it's Kansas at home. I guess that's the only thing that's different. They've really struggled with that over the last couple of seasons. And this season, I think it's as bad as it's been, because you heard the broadcast talk about it last night. All of their losses are only to Iowa State, Tennessee, Gonzaga, UConn. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Those are all good teams they lost to. But when do you start beating good teams? That's the mark of a good team, is to beat those teams. And Arizona, they've heard plenty of that this year. They had a tough non-con. And now they're 5-0 in the Big 12 because they've sacked up. They've nutted up a bit. And they said they were licking their chops to have Baylor in this game. They were, I'm sure, loving the fact that Baylor went back in the rankings this week, because they were like, finally, this is our chance to make a statement to this conference and to America that we have turned the corner. And they certainly made a statement last night. Arizona looked like they should have been in a different league than Baylor. Baylor shouldn't have been on the same court as them for 30 minutes of that game, 33 minutes of that game. And this is what we've come to see from Baylor this year. They put in a good effort the last 5, 6, 7 minutes, the last 2 media timeouts, and you come out of the game thinking, oh, well, they put in a shift today. Bummer. They just, tough road environment. And so anyone who's saying that today, they got you. They got you again. And it's really stunk, because Arizona, I mean, you look at those 2 teams, Baylor and Arizona, both probably didn't have the non-conference schedules results that they wanted. And here was a team in Baylor that was not ready to play in this game, not ready to play in an environment. And again, Arizona's got a great environment, sure, but that's what the Big 12 is. And Arizona, on the other hand, was waiting for this game and saying, finally, we're going to prove something. We're going to show these guys that we deserve to be in the running for this conference championship. And they did. They flat out kicked Baylor's ass in the first half. 42-19 at half. What positive do you take from that? They knocked them around. They bullied them. Physicality, it was men against boys. And I'm I guess a little refreshed to see the standard amongst Baylor fans, because the more these losses happen, the less people are like, oh, well, it was a road game against a good team. Pick it up, boys. I saw a fan base, maybe it was just the ones that stayed up last night. I saw a fan base on social media that was pissed, that's sick of this. Because this is not what Baylor is supposed to be from what we've seen the last 5 years. They're supposed to beat good teams at least once in a while, but they haven't beaten a good team this year. Arkansas, are you going to hang your hat on that now? What are they, 0-5 in the SEC? St. John's, when was the last time you saw them in the rankings? Cincinnati, yeah, they were ranked at one time. They don't win games in the Big 12. There's no win this year that you could really pound your chest about and say, that's Baylor. Finally, we've got it. I thought they were doing some things last week that would turn them around, but no way. No way. And the numbers in this one are misleading because of what Baylor did in the last 7 minutes and kind of made it somewhat close. I think they got it to 9 or 8 at one point. They made it look respectable to only lose by 11. They needed a 51-point second half to do that. But at that point, Arizona given up, lost interest in that game, had some of the reserves in, and Baylor was just trying to make it look respectable. And for Arizona, I don't know that there was any one person that totally controlled the game. Obviously, Veesaar had an awesome game off the bench. He gets 19 for them, 19-7, I think. But if you're Arizona, you love that was a team effort. That was all the way around team. And the other thing that Baylor fans are using as an excuse, and the coaching staff is as well, is the fact that they're shorthanded. And they are shorthanded, lest we forget. They are shorthanded. But the way Scott Drew put it, I don't think it's quite the way they think.
Big factor. I mean, you adjust what you do. We got 2 guys out, play similar position. In football, you have 2 quarterbacks out, changes what you do. You have 2 running backs, tailbacks, change what you do, 2 tight ends. So, but that's part of the game. Next man up mentality, and you got to find a way. And proud we've been able to win 2 games like that, and hopefully we can get guys back soon.
I'm sorry. You do not have 2 quarterbacks out. You do not have 2 running backs out. Your quarterbacks and your running backs are in. They're not doing anything. Roach, O'Meara gets into foul trouble early in this game. He's a non-factor. Jaden Nunn starts hitting some threes late when the game's gone. Those are your quarterbacks and your running backs. You're missing 2 depth guys, Jalen Celestine and Langston Love. That's who you're missing, and you miss them a lot of the time. So don't get like that. That is a fantasy land quote right there. That is a fantasy land justification that, hey, we're missing 2 running backs, two quarterbacks. 2 quarterbacks. Excuse me? Like what? Of course it changes what you can do. And I think if you look at it from the whole season, that needs to be taken into account. But the problem right now, from the eye test, from the fans, I guess, is not that Baylor's shorthanded. The problem is the guys that are supposed to be their main guys, that are supposed to be their quarterbacks and running backs, are not producing. Jeremy Roach and Jaden Nunn have been invisible in conference play. Invisible. They don't give you don't get anything from your backcourt. The only backcourt offense is Rob Wright, a freshman off the bench, creating at the rim. That's it. So you're this great offensive rebounding team most nights, and you can't even capitalize it because you don't have any shot makers. And you're getting bullied down low. They're out physicaling the crap out of you. And I'm hearing that they're missing 2 quarterbacks. Guys, that's not it. And if we're being quite honest, Langston Love's going to be day-to-day the whole year. You know, tip of the cap to the kid for fighting through it and trying to play. We all know he's trying to play. But you can't, after having 3 separate injuries last year and being out for the crucial games the year before, you can't go into the season thinking Langston Love is our quarterback. And when he's hurt, our quarterback is hurt. That is a recipe for disaster, a recipe for failure. And fans are getting sick of this. And it looks like it's a long season ahead, and that Baylor is going to benefit from the fact that the back half of the Big 12 is as bad as it's been in 5 or 6 years here. That's where Baylor's going to be beneficial. And you just got to cut out the scheduled losses. We just can't have that mentality anymore. And if this talent that they accrued in the offseason lives up to what it should be, then you're talking about Baylor getting back into the mix here. But until that happens, they're not in the mix in the Big 12. They're not in the mix for a top 4 or 5 seed right now. They're not at all. And Arizona proved something. Arizona proved to you and the Big 12 that they can compete in this conference. That was a fluke in the non-con, and that they have learned their lesson. And they're going to compete. They're going to be a team in the rankings. Baylor right now has not learned their lesson. And they're saying that 2 quarterbacks are out. The Baylor women have learned their lesson, I think. Big win over Utah last night. Let's go over that. And Baylor football finalizing that staff. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, you guys know what question I'm going to ask you. Have you guys saved any money with Rocket Money recently? Because I have. Okay. They help you find the subscriptions that you forget about or that you are paying for twice. And my ad read is now making me sign in. So I'm not going to be able to read this right now. But anyway, I'm kind of dying here. Okay. I'm going to have to pause this. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everyone together in one place: subscriptions, spending habits, even the goals you want to hit in 2025. Rocket Money has over 5 million users that have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, which makes you, the member, save up to $740 a year when you use the premium features. For me, it's definitely the subscription tracker. The things that I've saved money on by canceling those subscriptions. Oh boy, I could quit my day job, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to do that for you guys. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. One more time, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. No Dariana Littlepage bugs for Baylor, no problem. The team formerly known as the Lady Bears takes down number 22 Utah in somewhat convincing fashion. I mean, they had the lead most of the game. 70-61 is the final in that one. Had, I want to say like a 10 or 11 point lead at halftime, and they see it through to the end. This was a total team effort, which I know is kind of coach speak, kind of cliche, but when you don't have Dariana in there, you certainly needed it. And it was Nettie leading the way in points, 19 and 4. And how about the Bella Fauntleroy show? Because that was really who took over. 17 points and 10 rebounds in Bugs' absence. That's a huge step up. And you want to talk about step up. Whenever this team the last 2 years has needed someone to step up, Jada Walker and or Yaya Felder have come in to step up. Jada Walker was the floor general in this game. 12 points, 12 assists. How about that for a double-double for you? With all the talk of Aaliyah Matharu and Sarah Andrews, kind of getting her groove back a little bit this season, although she had an off night last night. Jada Walker, once again, just steps into whatever role this Baylor team needs for her to step into, and she does it with elegance and grace and with production. So big win for Baylor. They were receiving votes this past week in the AP poll. If they just get their business done this weekend, they will be back in the top 25 come next week. So a big win for Nikki Collins' squad. Shorthanded, they rallied together after a blowout win against Arizona State. They go on and get the big victory over Utah. That's back-to-back years. They've knocked out Utah when they were top 5 last year. So they got Houston at home this weekend. That should be an easy victory. And then Monday is the big one at the Foster, by the way. Number 1, UCLA in town. Baylor will be in the rankings again by then, and that will be an all-time matchup. Can't wait for that. Baylor football is still working, and it was first put out on this show. Well, 247 put out the report that they were interested in Carson Hall. I talked about it on this show. And then Locked On Baylor was the first to report on Wednesday, today, as I'm recording this and putting this out. Locked On Baylor was the first to report that Carson Hall is now the outside linebackers coach for the Baylor Bears. Pretty easy. Changed his Twitter bio and his Twitter profile picture and header there to all Baylor stuff. And boy, I love this hire. I say this all the time. Like, I know I'm probably not going to come in here and say like, oh boy, I love this position coach hire. But in the past, like, I didn't know much about Jamar Chaney when he came in here last year. It certainly worked out. Chris Kapilovic last year was one that I was like, this guy hadn't really had a great offensive line or run game for a while at Michigan State. And I think North Carolina was where he was before that. And thankfully, he was only there for about a month and a half. And then we didn't know anything about Mason Miller because he was coming from Tarleton and Mississippi State before that, but only as like a grad assistant / assistant positional coach. Mason Miller worked out for them. Chris Kapilovic did not. And let's see how great that Alabama team was this year. Was pretty much just as good as Baylor. But Carson Hall is a guy that I love the resume. 30 under 30 for 247, a list that's been very prestigious over the last few years and has won wherever he goes. He's been in the SEC. He played in the SEC. And this Kirby Smart connection cannot be overstated. I know there's some Georgia fans in the comment section that thought it was overstated, but the guy played for Kirby Smart and then coached under Kirby Smart in the most successful part of Smart's career and Georgia football history. Like, again, it's easy to forget because it was 2 years ago how dominant that team was for 2 straight seasons, 29-1. They didn't lose a regular season game, and they won back-to-back college football playoff national championships, including the biggest blowout in the history of the championship game. I know we all remember that well. And it's kind of funny that 2 guys who were on the defensive staffs of in that game on those 2 teams, Georgia and TCU, are now filling out Baylor's staff this year, with Paul Gonzalez being the defensive backs coach at TCU at the time, and Carson Hall being an assistant defensive line coach for Georgia, now taking over as cornerbacks coach and outside linebackers coach, respectively. Look, for these positional coach hires, there's only so much you can learn from them because they're usually guys who are fairly green, fairly new, like in Carson Hall's case. But you look who they've coached under. And, Gonzalez is not green or new, but he coached under Gary Patterson for a long time on Gary Patterson's side of the ball. And Carson Hall coached under Kirby Smart on his side of the ball, which is kind of like if you're in college and the professor tells you, don't do your research paper on the thing I did my doctoral thesis on because I'm going to parse it like 1,000 times. Like I'm going to rip it to shreds, rip it down to the bare bones. And so it's going to be really tough to get a good grade. That's the same thing with like Carson Hall being like, oh yeah, I'm just going to coach the defensive line for Kirby Smart's Georgia team, or Paul Gonzalez being the defensive backs for Gary Patterson. Like that's the toughest job on that staff that you can take. And they impressed enough that they're getting the accolades. Obviously, Gonzalez had all those awards from his players at TCU. Carson Hall won a national championship as grad assistant in D2, and then 2 national championships being a positional coach at the D1 level. They've passed the test. They've passed the research papers. And this was 2 pretty damn good additions to the Baylor football staff. And if these are the missing pieces, let's get to work. Can't wait. You could do a lot worse than taking from the Gary Patterson coaching tree and the Kirby Smart coaching tree, which is what Dave Aranda has done to round out the staff. Can't wait to see how it comes together. But just remember, for those people who are going to report on it later, Locked On Baylor had it first. The mainstream media will not credit me. I'm just putting it out there now. But you guys, the ones who watch and listen every day, you understand. You understand where your news is coming from. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. Let me know what you think about Baylor basketball and about the additions on this staff. Let me know in the comment section down below. Is Arizona for real? Is Baylor not for real? Please let me know in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. Again, 3/4 of you are watching every day and are not subscribed. That helps out the channel a lot. Plus, if you're in that notification bell, you get notified every time we're dropping a video on YouTube and then wherever you get your podcasts. We'll have a show in the morning, and then we'll have the squad show for the Big 12 in the afternoon. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today and every day, and we'll see you tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.